Hey guys, today I'm going to be reviewing a new foundation. It's from CoverGirl. It's called the Vitalist Healthy Elixir Foundation. If this sounds familiar, I did mention it in my haul video that I did recently. And this says it's a foundation with vitamins. Right here on the bottle it says E, B3, and B5. This does have broad spectrum SPF 20 sunscreen in it, and I wear it in the shade Creamy Natural. I would say it's a pretty darn close shade match, but it is just a little bit on the peachy side. So while it's pretty good depth-wise, it's just the tone is slightly off. But this is an oil-free foundation, it says on the back, and it claims that this foundation is going to be lightweight, full coverage, and hydrating. So those are three claims that don't necessarily always go together in a lot of foundations. So I want to share my review with you today. This is a full-on review. It's not a first impressions. I've been wearing this foundation on and off now for between 2 and 3 weeks, so I've got a pretty good indication of whether my skin is having any problems with it. Sometimes you got to give your skin a little bit of time to see just, you know, is it gonna have some kind of weird change in relation to the new foundation you're wearing. First off, let's just talk about the packaging here. It's a glass bottle. It does have a pump. You've got this cap, which I find I'm already getting kind of messy just with product from the pump. It kind of touches up with the end of that pump. But the top of the foundation does lock, so if you want to do away with this entirely, you might feel comfortable with that. But yeah, no problems for me in terms of the packaging of this. I do love a pump because I think when you start to understand how much of a foundation you want to use, you can really be consistent with it when there's a pump. So for example, with this, I've found that one pump seems to be adequate to get all over my face and give me what I think is an acceptable coverage level for this foundation, so I'm able to stay with that every time I use it. And I guess that'll roll right into the application of this product, so I'll show you this going on. I do find it very easy to apply. I've used both a beauty blender and a brush, but I do find that a brush, like a dense foundation brush, kind of like a Sigma F80, tends to be what maintains the most coverage with this foundation. Not that a beauty blender doesn't look pretty with this, but I do think I get the most coverage out of it with a brush. So I like to just kind of patch the product all over my skin, and then I just use the brush to buff in everywhere, and it's easy to blend. I don't feel like it sets too quickly, and one of the things that I really love about this foundation is the finished look right after I get it all blended in. I feel like it looks awfully skin-like. You know, it does definitely even out some skin tone issues here and there, but the look on the skin, just the appearance of my skin after I've got this on, it looks really fresh, doesn't look too makeup-y, doesn't appear to be clinging to any areas of dryness because I have a few of those here and there. And yeah, it's just a really good looking foundation right at the onset. Going back to several of those claims that they had on the bottle, you know, is it lightweight? Yes, I do think it feels lightweight. The consistency of this foundation is like a pretty traditional liquid. You know, it's not too thick, it's not as runny as water, but it's, you know, a relatively thin liquid foundation. Is it full coverage though? I would say no. To me, this is a strong medium coverage. I do think it's kind of buildable. There have been times where I've gone back and added a little extra here and there, and I think I've improved the coverage, but this is doing pretty much what a lot of medium coverage foundations do for me. It's giving me a much more even skin tone overall, but when I look for more pinpointed things like little freckles that I know about on my skin and I kind of get an up close look, I can see that those are still very apparent. It's not doing much for anything really happening on my under eyes, and there are most definitely full coverage foundations out there that do take care of those types of issues. But I do agree with the hydrating claim on this. I don't find it to be hydrating like right after I apply it. It's not like, oh, my skin's just super sticky. Just a little bit of a slight tackiness, but it's nothing unusual for a liquid foundation. If you like to see that kind of thing smoothed out and you like your finish of your face to be a little more matte and soft, you could definitely top it off with a powder. This is not the kind of thing that looks luminous because of any sort of flecks of shimmer or anything, but it just looks healthy and skin-like. And like I said, you've got that option of applying more powder on top and mattifying it a bit more. But there is kind of a deal breaker for me with this in terms of staying power, and I do think we're going into the time of year where staying power is probably the most challenging. You know, the time of year when you're outside a little bit more, the elements, you know, are a bit more of a factor in terms of your staying power of your makeup, a little more humidity in the air. But I'm really not a big fan of the way this wears on my skin. I feel like I'm a pretty much overall normal skin type, and most foundations, you know, don't fight me too much on that. You know, like I don't get super oily with a lot of things, but this one I've found it really does break down on my skin by about midday, and that's kind of soon, I think, for this. Like if I'm putting it on at between 5 and 6 in the morning, then I look at my skin at noon, I see quite a bit of breakdown in this product. And it's mostly around the nose and sides of the nose, but also kind of around the mouth, chin area, maybe even a little on the forehead. So having given this foundation a pretty good shot, just using it on its own with very little setting powder, not bringing in different primers with it, that's kind of my base situation that this gives me. So as I've experimented with this, I've adjusted what I've done a little bit, and I've used the Smashbox Pore Minimizing Primer underneath it, which if you're not familiar with all of Smashbox's primers, like that's a very different primer compared to regular photo finish. It has kind of a beigey look to it, and it's a little bit like Benefit's Professional, only I think quite a bit smoother than that, and this has helped certain foundations that have given me trouble in terms of staying power. So this has helped this a little bit. It's kind of odd. It's like it gives this foundation just a little more time. I feel like the foundation might look a little fresher longer, like maybe later in the afternoon I start to see the bit of breakdown instead of like at noon, but eventually it gets there. And I'm just not in a place right now, you know, taking care of a couple of little kids. I'm not continually wanting to touch up. There are many products that I can use that don't make me feel the need to touch up. So that's really what it's come to with foundations these days. There are things that really can last all day and look good. Now, what about powder on top of this? I've set this a little and I've set it a lot. And what I've kind of settled on overall is just doing a little bit of T-zone setting powder, because as this starts to wear down, it's not like it completely disappears. It might look like it's disappeared, let's say from right here on my nose, but then I start looking at the creases around my nose and I'm seeing foundation powder, like, you know how it looks after you've worn it? It's like you can just see makeup collecting in different areas, and I think that's some foundation and probably some powder too. So when I'm a little lighter with the powder, I don't see quite as much of that going on, I guess is what I'm trying to say. But at the same time, a little bit of powder in certain areas I think can help. And sure, you could probably improve the look of things if you wanted to take the time and do a midday touch up, you know, do a little powder, do a little blotting. That might help, but I think there are some people who have time for that and who recognize that that might be something they actually would realistically do, and then there are some of us who know where there's no time. So I think you kind of got to assess your own situation there, but I was a little disappointed for the fact that my skin is not terribly oily at all, and this made me look pretty oily by about midway through. So I think if you're extremely oily, this may not be your best friend at all. If you're more dry, I'd love to hear your feedback in the comments. How was the staying power for you? I suspect maybe you'd have a better experience even than I had. But overall, I would say this foundation falls somewhere in the average category for me. You know, I've definitely tried things that have been worse, but I've tried a whole lot of things that are better. The first thing that comes to mind was something I just recently talked about in a video, which is the Rimmel Lasting Finish Foundation. You know, this really accomplishes a lot of what this does for looking so good right after you apply it and looking so skin-like, but I feel like I get a little more coverage out of this and I get much better staying power. So there's just like one example. So what am I going to do with this now that I have it? I probably am going to still wear it from time to time, maybe do a little mixing with some different foundations to improve the tone of it even more, even though it's not like too far off. It's not terrible, but I think I could improve that a little bit and maybe even help the staying power by combining it with different things. But it's definitely not going to be a go-to for me on a day when I'm like, you know, I need this makeup to look as flawless as possible all day long. No, I'm not having that expectation out of this foundation. It'll look really good right at the start and maybe for the first few hours of wear, but there is a definite like breakdown point for this on my skin. And I didn't talk a whole lot about price with this, but I mean, I think I paid around 11, 12 bucks for this at Ulta. Not exactly cheap anyway where drugstore foundations are concerned. But I hope this review was helpful to you guys if you're considering this foundation. I don't want to be too big of a Debbie Downer on it because everybody can have different experiences with different products, but I just wanted to give you my take, and thank you guys so much for watching. Bye!